She knew he had to leave, but she didn't expect it to be without saying goodbye. He always said she was his home, the only one who understood him in silence. While he was away to sort out his life, she fed the house with hope, organized drawers, watered plants, and waited for news. But the days turned into weeks, and his silence became a scream inside her. When he finally returned, he was wearing a ring on his finger and had a strange sparkle in his eyes. He didn't explain. He just smiled and said, "I brought something for you, too." But the gift stayed in the suitcase, and she was no longer there. What happened next, he never had the courage to tell. But those who saw it, remember. Because karma has a special way of teaching those who forget to value the love that asks for nothing, just presence. He thought she would always be there, like the pictures on the walls, like the smell of coffee she made, like the towel folded on the bed. But he didn't understand that when a woman loves in silence and takes care of everything without demanding anything, it's not because she's satisfied, it's because she believes, until something inside her breaks. And when it breaks, it doesn't make a sound. It just goes away. She didn't leave a letter or a message. She just left the scene. And it was in that emptiness and in that moment between the hello and the how could you that he realized he had lost everything that was real. The ring he proudly displayed never shone as brightly as her eyes. And the gift he brought from his trip was left without an owner. Because time doesn't give back what was neglected, and love that is ignored learns to leave. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. She still remembered the sound of the door slamming shut on that cloudy morning, as if the world knew that something inside her was closing too. The kettle was whistling in the kitchen, the coffee was brewing, and he didn't even look back. He said he had to go, that it was only for a short time, that he would come back better, more ready, safer for both of them. And she believed him. She didn't question, she didn't beg, she didn't cry. She just nodded with a light, trembling smile, while her heart begged for silence. After he crossed the threshold, time began to slip by slowly. His footsteps still echoed in the hallway of the building when she began to sweep the living room as she always did, as if she could also clean his sudden absence. She washed the dishes, folded his clothes, made the bed carefully, always leaving the left side untouched, waiting for him to lie down there again. In the first few days, she would wake up in the middle of the night thinking she had heard the key in the door. But it was nothing. Just the wind hitting the windows or some dream trying to trick the chest. The neighbors would ask about him, and she would say with a smile that no longer hurt so much, "He's out taking care of some things. He'll be back soon." When she went to the market, she would take 2 bags. She would buy the tea he liked, the whole wheat bread he said was healthier, and even the new shirt she imagined he would need when he returned. She would carefully put everything away in the closet, like someone preparing for the return of someone very important. At night, she would write down in a notebook random phrases he had said on the couch, whisper songs they had danced to in the living room, remember the warm touch of his hands. Nothing was strange yet. She believed that love was just like that, strong enough to wait, silent enough not to suffocate, and she was willing to wait, because she had always believed that those who truly love stay. But the days turned into weeks, and his messages began to get shorter. At first they were audio messages, then text messages, and finally, just emojis. She pretended not to notice the distance. She wanted to believe that he was confused, perhaps overwhelmed, perhaps afraid of being happy. She tried to understand him more than she understood herself. It was as if her heart had taken on the work of 2, loving for both, resisting for both, caring for both. But little by little, even the most stubborn heart gets tired. She no longer smelled his scent on her pillows. She no longer cooked the dishes he liked. She no longer talked to herself in the kitchen or waited for the hallway light to turn on. She was beginning to understand that he might not come back. And yet, she didn't hate him. What hurt the most wasn't his absence. It was the fact that he had never said goodbye. She didn't know that his "I'm just going to take care of a few things," was in fact the beginning of a disguised goodbye. While he flew away to some corner of the country where the sun seemed to shine brighter for him than for her, she remained there, faithful to the idea of a love that was already beginning to die without her knowing. He sent her spaced messages, full of lukewarm words, an empty "I miss you" and "I'll see you soon" that no longer had a face, nor a date, nor a color. But she pretended to believe, like someone who protects a flower even though they know the root is rotten. She organized her life around an unspoken promise. She took care of the house as if it were a temple, waiting for the return of the only visitor who really mattered. She left the windows ajar, the sofa clean, his perfume in the closet, but inside her, a part of her was already starting to prepare for the worst, even without the courage to admit it. While he said he was taking care of things, she paid the bills with what was left of their savings. He had left everything in her hands, as if he trusted her, as if he knew she would never let anything go unnoticed. And she didn't. She held her own with dignity, smiled at the doorman, pretended to be strong for her. Parents avoided calling her friends because she knew the first question would be, "And so, is he back yet?" She was ashamed to say no, not for him but for you, for having believed so much, for having given so much of herself to someone who didn't even have the courage to look back when he left. The nights began to drag on. The couch seemed bigger, the bed colder, the days longer. Time had a different taste now, a taste of bitter waiting. Even so, she refused to give in to the pain. She continued to believe that his silence was tiredness, not disinterest, that his absence was necessity, not selfishness. Until one day, when she opened a social network, she saw a photo. It was him, in a suit, smiling, next to a woman she didn't know. And there was a caption, "New beginnings deserve courage." She couldn't understand it right away. Maybe it was a project, a friend, an event. But something about that image chilled her, and she felt for the first time that she had been left behind. Not with a fight, not with words, but with a calculated absence. He had left without leaving. He had built another path without even telling her that she was no longer part of the plan. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember the exact moment when everything started to change. But there was none, because sometimes love doesn't end with screams or betrayals. It simply dissolves in carelessness, fades in fatigue, hides between the lines of messages. The next day she got up as usual. She made coffee, watered the plants. But something in her was no longer the same. She still loved him, but for the first time, she also loved herself. And that changed everything. She didn't call him, she didn't text him. She just started folding in silence each piece of his clothing, not to wash but to put away. By the third week, she no longer expected the sound of a key in the door, or a message, or anything. She was beginning to understand that he would not return, at least not in the way she had dreamed. The days became quieter, not because of his absence, but because of what she had stopped telling herself. The house was still clean, but there was no longer any attention to detail. The cutlery was left in the sink. The coffee went cold in the cup. The pictures on the wall seemed lost. And inside her, a new tiredness emerged. It was not anger. It was a gentle sadness, a mourning without burial, as if she had lost someone who was still breathing. A love that, even though it had not been declared dead, no longer pulsed. She looked at his sneakers leaning against the door and wondered how she could love someone so much that she had the courage to leave without saying goodbye. Sometimes she would doze off on the couch and dream of him walking through the door, smiling like before, saying that everything was fine now. But she would wake up in the same emptiness. The phone would ring and her heart would still race, but it was just demands. Advertising, or someone who wasn't part of the story. His name no longer appeared on the screen, not as a number, not as a memory, just as an absence, as a gap, as an unfilled space. Deep down, she already knew. And yet, she kept making dinner on Fridays. She sat alone at the table, breaking the bread as if someone was going to arrive. She kept half of it in the jar with the blue lid, which he liked. A foolish hope, perhaps. But those who truly love each other find it hard to accept that the other simply gave up, not out of guilt, but out of unimportance. Until one night a friend arrived unannounced. She was the only one who still insisted on knocking on the door and saying, "Sorry to intrude, but you need to know." She brought a printout, an image, a confirmation, his name on the engagement record, the same woman from the photo, the same guiltless smile. The date marked 3 days before the last message he had sent. 3 days before he wrote, "I miss you." She said nothing. She just nodded, picked up the picture and put it inside the book that was on the coffee table. She continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. But inside, a door closed. A door that he would never be able to open again. That night, she did not sleep in the bedroom. She lay on the living room floor, hugging one of his coats, and she cried softly. Not for him, but for everything she had given, without him even realizing how much it cost. Love for her had always been giving. For him, it was rest. And now she understood, while she was a port, he was a passage, and ports do not chase ships that have chosen another destination. The next morning she woke up feeling different. Her body still felt heavy, but her heart seemed to have understood something that her mind still couldn't explain. She didn't make coffee. She didn't open the windows. She just walked to the closet and calmly began to fold each of his clothes. There was no anger in her gesture, just a sad serenity, like someone tidying the room of someone who won't be coming back. She folded the blue shirt he wore on Sundays, the one that smelled of lavender and reminded her of long hugs. She sorted the shoes he left lying around. She took the half-empty bottle of cologne from the bathroom. Everything was carefully placed in a brown suitcase that stood on top of the wardrobe. The same one he had taken on his first trip and never used again. Now it was the symbol of the end. That day, she didn't cry. She missed. Him, yes, but not the kind of longing that paralyzes. It was a longing that clarified. She realized for the first time that she was living with ghosts, that every detail of the house that belonged to him was an anchor tied to what would never be again. She decided to leave. She walked the streets aimlessly, went into a bookstore, sat on a bench in the square. She observed the people. No one recognized her, and that was liberating. She returned home at dusk, and for the first time, she didn't wait anxiously for the night. She lit a candle, put on some light music, and began to write. Not for him, for herself. Each line was a step away from the pain. It was as if, finally, the love she felt for him was returning to herself, like a silent return of dignity. The next day, the suitcase was left by the door, not as a burden but as a sign. It was her response to the abandonment he had never had the courage to confess. It was not revenge, it was a dignified goodbye. During that week, she organized everything. She cleaned, took down old photos from the wall, donated some clothes she no longer wanted to see. She started working more, accepting invitations she had previously refused. It was still difficult to sleep, it still hurt to see couples on the street, but there was a different flame growing inside her, a strength that came from deep within, as if the love she had given was returning in the form of light. And then, almost 2 months later, the doorbell rang. She knew it. Would be him. Not because she had predicted it, but because certain twists and turns are predictable when the other person leaves, thinking that love waits forever. He was standing there, with his eyes a little lost. He had a new suitcase in his hands and a poorly wrapped gift. He smiled as if he had done nothing, as if time had frozen for both of them. "I'm back," he said. She looked at the brown suitcase still leaning against the door. It was still there, untouched, full of his clothes. The gift he brought seemed too small compared to what she had already returned. "Your suitcase has been packed for a long time," she replied, opening the door, not for him to come in, but for him to take what was left of a love that only she had tried to save. He hadn't expected that. He stood on the threshold, not knowing what to do with the flowers he had bought at the airport, or with the rehearsed smile that now seemed ridiculous. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a gentle firmness, as if she no longer owed him an explanation. It was a different kind of pain now, one that had already been processed. She walked away, leaving the door open, and he, as if searching for crumbs from a banquet that had once been his, entered slowly. His eyes scanned the room in search of some memory, some detail left there for him. But there was nothing. The walls were bare, the picture frames were gone, the sofa seemed smaller. It was as if he had returned to a house he had never lived in. He left his suitcase on the floor and tried to joke, "Did you paint the wall?" But she didn't answer. She just guided him with her gaze to the old suitcase. And he understood. There was everything that belonged to him, folded, clean, cared for, but not out of love, out of respect. Finally, she tried to justify it. She said things got out of control, that the other relationship was a mistake, that his life only made sense with her. But the words rang in the air and fell heavily to the ground. She just listened, like someone listening to a distant noise that no longer has the power to hurt. He looked for the woman who took care of his coffee, his shirts, his heart, in every gesture she made. But she was no longer there. That woman had left when she realized that love did not mean giving up, when she understood that those who disappear without saying goodbye also do not deserve to be reunited. And she had found herself again, alone, amidst her pain, her silences, and her own strength. When he asked if there was anyone, she smiled slightly. She didn't answer with words. She just picked up the old suitcase and put it near the door again. He understood that the question didn't matter, that the answer was bigger than another man. It was about her, about what she had become, about what she had rebuilt in silence. He said he still loved her, and she, with calm eyes, answered, "But you love what I was, and I'm not that woman anymore." There was a maturity in her tone that dismantled him. For the first time he saw that he had truly lost her, not through betrayal, not through fighting, but through absence, through neglect, for having thought that love would freeze while one lives another life. He picked up his suitcase, looked around the room once more and tried to say something, but she had already closed the door. No rush, no resentment, just with the certainty of someone who knows they don't need to shout to be heard. Inside the house, she took a deep breath. She leaned against the wall and allowed a tear to fall, not for him but for herself, for the woman who for so long waited for someone who never arrived. And now, for the first time, she didn't wait anymore, because the love she was looking for outside was already inside her. After that day, the house finally seemed to breathe on its own. There was silence, yes, but it wasn't the same as before. Before, it was a silence of absence, of doubt, of waiting. Now it was a silence of new beginnings, an empty space that tasted of freedom. She started waking up earlier, making her own coffee calmly, playing music in the kitchen while she tidied up with her own rhythm. She started to rediscover her own presence, filling every corner of the house with something new, a plant, a different painting, a light curtain that let more sunlight in. Every gesture was a statement. She was alive and whole, and she no longer belonged to the shadow of someone who only knew how to leave. At work, her colleagues noticed the change. She smiled more, but with a kind of lightness that no one could name. There was no more tiredness in her eyes, nor that tired shine of someone who expects too much and receives too little. She went back to studying, reading late at night, going out with friends she had pushed away without realizing it. Little by little, the places that hurt began to change color. The restaurant where she waited for him was now a meeting point with a dear friend. The park where they walked became a place for reflection. She no longer ran away from places. They now belonged to her, and not to a memory. Even so, sometimes her heart wavered. At night, when her body grew tired and the silence once again pressed against the walls, flashes came. A smile from him, a touch, an old phrase. But she already knew what to do with it. She closed her eyes and gave thanks, not for what they had experienced, but for what she had learned. He was a chapter, not the book. It was a journey, not the destination, and although it hurt, He was also the one who led her to herself, and that cannot be erased. One afternoon she received a message, a familiar number, a short sentence. "Are you okay?" She read it. She left her cell phone on the table, and she didn't answer. Not because she wanted to hurt anyone, but because she was no longer the woman who needed to give explanations. Her peace no longer fit in old questions. That same night, she went out for dinner. An unexpected invitation from someone she had met a few days ago. A kind, soft-spoken man who didn't ask about the past, but wanted to know about what she dreamed of doing in the future. She listened, laughed, said little, but she felt. For the first time in a long time, she felt. Not for someone else, but for herself. And when she returned home, she took off her shoes, lit a scented candle, and wrote in the notebook that had previously been filled with her feelings about him. This time, just one sentence. "Today I was the one who came back." She closed the notebook and smiled. She didn't need anything else. She had found herself again. She still passed by places that brought back memories. A coffee shop downtown, where he promised he would take her to Paris one day. A flower stand where he bought daisies when he made a mistake. And the window of the ring shop, which she discovered by chance, was the same one where he had chosen the ring. But not for her. Not anymore. Those places no longer cut. As deep as before, but they left a bitter taste in her soul. It wasn't hurt. It was memories. It was herself in another version, believing, smiling, making plans without knowing that it was all a monologue. Now she saw the scenes as if she were on the outside. An old movie where the protagonist was sweet, faithful but blind. His messages stopped coming. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of shame. Or maybe because he finally realized that she wasn't coming back. Instead, different invitations started arriving. A new course, a cultural event, a reading group. It was as if the universe had waited for her to empty her chest before it began to fill it with life. And she accepted, with slow but firm steps. Each yes was an invisible seam in the tears he had left. And each laugh that escaped her mouth when she met new people was a reminder. She was coming back to herself. One day a friend asked her, "What if he came back different?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm not the same anymore." And she wasn't. The woman who had waited alone, who had made dinners and set tables for someone who never arrived, now cooked for herself with loud music, a glass of wine in her hand, and a light dress on her body. Not out of vanity, but out of joy, out of self-love, for the simple life that was being reborn. The pictures on the wall had changed, the plants had grown, and even the scent of the house was different. He had left every corner, even the air, and even if every now and then memory tried to test her peace, she already knew the way back. Look in the mirror. Because now when you looked, you no longer saw a woman waiting to be chosen. You saw someone who chose herself, and no one could take that away. One morning, as she was leaving the house to take care of simple daily tasks, she saw a scene that froze her steps. A couple on the opposite sidewalk. He, in a wrinkled suit, hurried steps, cell phone in hand. She, young, pretty, with an anxious look, trying to keep up. And for a second, she recognized the gesture, the way he held her bag inattentively, how he answered in monosyllabic terms, how he looked around as if he wanted to be somewhere else. She already knew that script. It was the same look he had given her, weeks before he disappeared. The same distance disguised as presence. It made her remember everything but without pain. Just with a calm recognition, like someone who sees from afar the fire they have already survived. She kept walking, crossed the street, and decided to have coffee out that day. A small gesture, but for her full of symbolism. She always ordered takeout, but that day she sat down, at a table near the window, with a book in her bag and time to herself. The waiter kindly asked if she was waiting for someone, and she, smiling, answered, "Yes, myself." She smiled slightly, opened the book, but did not read. She observed the world around her, and there, between sips of hot coffee and the early afternoon wind, she was sure she had returned home. Not the one with walls, the one inside. The one he messed up and that she rebuilt alone. A few days later, He received a letter. He didn't have a sender, but he recognized the handwriting. It was his, short, almost dry. He said he missed her, that he knew he had made a mistake, that he didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted her to know that he only understood her value after he lost her. She read it once, twice. The third time, she folded the paper carefully and put it in a drawer, not out of affection but out of respect for the story that had been. She didn't reply, because some answers don't need to be written. They are in what we choose not to say. That night, as she lay alone, she felt a strange peace. Neither joy nor sadness, just peace, as if every part of her had fallen back into place, as if each tear had built the new ground she now stood on. She closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long time, there was no weight in her chest. Just space, for the new, for the light, for what was yet to come. A few months passed. Life had already changed its tone, and her days flowed lightly. It wasn't about forgetting, but about moving on. There were no traces of him in her closets, in her songs, in her daily gestures. The scars were still there, but they no longer hurt. They had become internal maps of everything she had been through. On a warm spring afternoon, she was invited to an event at the city's art gallery. A friend she had met. Recently, someone who wasn't part of the before, insisted that she go, and she went. Without expecting anything, without looking for anyone, just for herself. The gallery was full. Light laughter, conversations between sips of wine, modern paintings hanging on white walls. She walked around calmly, admiring the works with honest curiosity. That was when she heard his name, low, almost a whisper, coming from a group a few feet away. "He's going to exhibit here next month." She turned her head. A way out of reflex, but quickly regained her composure. It wasn't a surprise. He'd always had a talent for art. But now, that name no longer hurt her. It just reminded her of a time gone by, like someone who finds an old song on a playlist and chooses not to listen to it. Later, as she looked at a piece of work made of stitched scraps, loose pieces held together by a red thread that ran through them, she felt an unexpected emotion. It was as if the art had been made with her soul. Each cutout represented a part that had been broken off, but was now there, whole, beautiful on display. She smiled, her eyes filling with tears. The curator noticed and came closer. "This piece is called Reconstructed," she said. She took a deep breath and replied, "That's exactly how I feel." That night when she got home, she wrote again, this time in the same notebook where she had cried before. But it was no longer a rant. It was gratitude, not for him but for herself, for not having hardened. Herself. For not having let the pain turn her into someone bitter, for having been reborn, firmer, softer, more her own. She closed the notebook and for the first time left it on the shelf, as if to say, "Now you are part of my story, but you no longer dictate my days." The next day the morning light invaded the room and she woke up without rushing. He made coffee, opened the window and let the sun touch her face. And there, between the smell of coffee and the bird song, she understood that she no longer needed to run after anything, because life had finally caught up with her. The following week a formal invitation arrived in the mail. It was for the official opening of the city's new cultural wing, a gala event with tributes, speeches, and local artists. His name was on the list of honorees, printed in gold on the back of the card. She read it slowly. She didn't feel her heart race, nor did her mind question whether she should go. She just thought, now he's the one being watched. She put the invitation in a drawer and went on with her day. But as the date approached, something in her stirred. It wasn't a desire to see him. It was the need to bring something to a close, like someone closing a circle not with words, but with presence, with truth, with a steady gaze and a peaceful soul. On the night of the event, she chose a light, elegant dress that left her shoulders bare. She tied her hair up simply and put on a pair of earrings that she had bought months before, still with tears in her eyes, when she decided that she would never again diminish herself for anyone. She arrived early, walked around the brightly lit room, chatted with acquaintances, and greeted new people. She was calm, beautiful, different, and that was how he saw her. Across the room, amidst the reporters and flashbulbs, he spotted her. She wasn't looking for him. She wasn't avoiding him. She was just there, naturally taking up his space. He approached with hesitant steps, carrying a half-empty glass and his eyes full of questions. When he was face to face with her, he said her name as if it were a request. She responded with a small, polite smile and a hello that no longer carried pain. He wanted to start a conversation, remember moments, tell her news. But she didn't go into depth. She answered what was necessary, politely, like someone who recognizes someone from an old story, but no longer wants to open the book again. During the keynote speech, the master of ceremonies called his name enthusiastically. He went on stage, thanked her, and spoke about art and new beginnings. And for a moment, he looked in her direction, as if he expected to find confirmation, pride, forgiveness in her eyes. But she did not look away. She just stood there, and in the silence of her gaze he understood everything. After the event, she left without saying goodbye. Not out of contempt, but because there was nothing left to close. It was already over. On the way home, her heart felt light, almost floating. She knew he would come home with questions, and she with answers, not about the past, but about who she had become, because now, finally, everything about her was present. After that night, he never tried to contact her again, not because he didn't want to, but because he understood that there was no more room. Her gaze, mature and calm, said more than any explanation. It was the kind of silence that left no room for hope, and she didn't need to talk to anyone about what she felt either. She went home with her heels in her hands, walking barefoot around the living room, smiling to herself. She calmly took off her dress, washed her face, tied her hair, and looked in the mirror. There was no makeup, no special light, no applause, but there was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The woman who survived, who grew, who remade herself. In the days that followed, everything seemed to take on a new lightness. The usual tasks, the grocery, shopping, the dishes, the emails, were done with presence. There were no more gaps, nothing was missing. For the first time in a long time, she was full of herself. Her phone rang with messages from new friends, job offers, invitations to meet. But she took her time. He knew he didn't have to prove anything to anyone, not to him, not to the world, and certainly not to you. One Saturday afternoon, she decided to visit the sea. She took a bus alone and went to the nearest beach. She sat on the sand with her light dress fluttering in the wind and just stayed there listening to the waves, feeling the sun, breathing deeply. There, in front of that infinite horizon, she understood that everything she had experienced had a purpose. That even the abandonment, the pain, the waiting, the silence, all of this served to push her back inside, to the place she had forgotten, the place where truth lives. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time he said, "You are my safe haven." And then she realized he never wanted to dock, just to anchor for a while. But she was the ocean, and now she knew it. She would no longer be content to be a temporary shelter for those who only sought calm. She wanted to be the sea for those who knew how to swim with her, not as an escape, but as a choice. On the way home, she stopped at a bookstore and bought a new notebook. The other one was full of memories, ruptures and scars. This one would be full of beginnings, of plans, of poetry. And on that first page, she wrote just one sentence. "I don't wait for anyone anymore, but when someone comes, I will be whole." The seasons changed. The city's trees changed colors, coats returned to the shop windows, and people now walked the streets with steaming cups in their hands. She changed too. She walked differently, more upright, not out of pride, but out of restored dignity. Her eyes no longer searched unfamiliar faces for traces of the past. Now they saw the present clearly. It wasn't about having overcome. It was about having understood. Everything she once believed to be a loss was actually deliverance. It was protection disguised as pain. It was the right end of the wrong beginning. One rainy afternoon, she decided to visit the local museum, where a new traveling collection was being exhibited. She had already become accustomed to treating herself to small moments like this, places where no one was waiting for her, where she could just be herself without any previous stories stuck to her skin. As she walked among sculptures and photographs, she stopped in front of a painting with strong lines and dark colors. There was something raw, yet beautiful there. An image that seemed to carry pain and strength in the same space. She read the signature. It was his. She was unfazed. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to look at the work from a distance. It was good, intense, sincere, but there was no light. She continued on unhurriedly. In another wing, she saw an installation of broken mirrors assembled in the shape of a flower. In the center, a phrase engraved in glass: "The parts that broke me taught me to reflect." And there, yes, she felt something. It spoke to her, as if to say, everything that hurt transformed you, not into another person, but into the best version of yourself. As she left the museum, she was caught in a light drizzle. She didn't run. She walked slowly, with her face up, feeling each drop as a blessing. Cars passed. By the city lights came on, and she, wet and at peace, laughed to herself. She thought that maybe this was freedom, walking in the rain without hiding, without having to pretend to be strong, without waiting for someone to offer her a coat. Because now she knew how to protect herself. She knew how to embrace herself. Arriving home, she took off her shoes, turned on a yellow light, and put on some soft music. She made tea and sat by the window. The world outside was rushing by, but inside her, everything was calm. Everything had found its place. And before going to sleep, she wrote one more sentence in her new notebook. "I didn't lose myself because I loved too much. I found myself because I didn't accept less than I deserve." The city was colder that morning, but she felt warm inside. She had an interview scheduled with the coordinator of a social project she had been following from a distance, an initiative that used art to lift up women who were victims of abandonment, violence, and silent loss. She arrived at the location wearing a simple dress and with calm eyes. The room was full of colors, voices, and broken stories. She sat with other women and listened to their stories. Some were crying, others remained quiet. They all recognized each other, even though they didn't know each other. And when the coordinator asked someone to tell her why they were there, she didn't hesitate. She stood up gently, fixed her hair, and in a firm voice said, "I came because I learned how to rebuild myself after someone left without saying goodbye. And I don't want any woman to feel like she has to wait to be loved." The room fell silent. There was no tragedy in her words. There was truth and healing. She smiled, sat back down, and in that moment she knew that the past was no longer a wound. It had become a bridge. In the following months, she began volunteering for the project. She taught therapeutic writing. She suggested self-portrait exercises in words. Many cried. Some gave up, but many came back. One of them, very young, with a downcast look, wrote on a piece of paper, "He said he would come back. I believed him, but it's been a year." She didn't say anything. She just touched the girl's hand and let the silence explain everything. Because now she knew there is pain that doesn't need an answer, just a presence. And that's what she had become. A firm, serene presence that said without shouting, "You will survive." One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a municipal event about stories of overcoming. She refused 3 times. She thought she had nothing to say, but the coordinator insisted, "What you experienced can save someone who is living now." She accepted. She went up on stage with a heavy heart. It wasn't about him. It was about her and about all the others. She began by telling a simple story, the beginning of love, the absence, the silence, the empty return. And then she spoke about reconstruction, about the new woman, about finding herself. When she finished, she received a standing ovation, and among the audience she saw a familiar face. Him, alone, standing at the back of the auditorium, eyes downcast, not daring to applaud. She stepped off the stage and walked past him without stopping. But something about him called to her. It wasn't his voice nor his gesture. It was his gaze, empty, small, disoriented. For a second she felt sorry, but not bitterly. It was a brief, clean feeling, like someone who sees an old shadow pass by. She turned around and said simply, "Now you understand what I was." And he left. That night he went to bed early. He didn't write. He didn't cry. He just slept with a light smile, like someone who knows he's closed a cycle. In the dream, he was in a new house with huge windows and lots of flowers. There was music, laughter, and no absence, only presence, only light. When he woke up, the sun was flooding the room. He got up, took a shower, made coffee, and went out for another day. At Tao, the building's entrance, there was a package, no sender. Inside, a small wooden box, and inside it a note in his handwriting. "It took me a while to understand, but you were home." She smiled. She closed the box and placed it on the shelf, next to the notebook where she wrote her first sentence of freedom. Not to keep the past, but to remind herself every day that sometimes the true home is not where someone stays. It is the place we build inside ourselves when we decide to leave. If this story touched your heart, leave a like so that more people are reached. Subscribe to the channel to receive other stories that move and transform. And write here in the comments, whoever leaves without saying goodbye, one day returns and finds no one there. I'll love reading your opinion. And now watch the video that is appearing on the screen, because it will make you feel it too. Sometimes all we need is to hear a story that sounds like ours.